Okay, welcome back. Today's lecture is going to be on uh, the actual start of World War One. We're going to cover Blitzkrieg tactics. We're going to cover the invasion of Poland, the invasion of France, the miracle at Dunkirk, and the Battle of Britain. So let's get started. All right. The first thing I think that we have to understand about the beginnings of World War II in Europe is Hitler and Germany have really learned their lessons from World War One. They know that they don't want to be in a war of attrition, that eventually Germany will run out of resources. And they understand that fighting the way that they did during World War One, which is trench warfare, just isn't going to be able to get it done for Germany, and so they have to essentially avoid that at all costs. And so what they do is they use technology to really kind of dictate what their methods are going to be and what their strategy is going to be. And so, because of that, they end up coming up with a philosophy that gets the name Blitzkrieg, which just means lightning war. And so, it's just a strategy to use modern technology and the internal combustion engine to make war faster because Germany believes their soldiers are better trained. They clearly believe in, the racial superiority of the Aryan race. So they believe their soldiers are just innately better. But they also believe that their industry is incredibly powerful and that their military technology is better. And so they want to use that to fight as quickly as possible. And if they do that, they believe that they'll be successful. And initially, they really are. Hitler's going to make a few just gigantic mistakes that are going to keep Germany from successfully being able to win World War II. So Blitzkrieg is just kind of the new way of fighting that Germany really kind of innovates, which is no surprise because they were the innovators all throughout World War One as well. And that it's going to take a while for Great Britain and France to adapt. I mean, France is going to be effectively out of the war very, very quickly. So, what is Blitzkrieg? Well, like I said, it is, it means it literally translates to lightning war. And so the idea is not to hit your enemy head on, it's to use all the kind of modern technology to avoid a, head-on confrontation, right? We don't want this because when we get this, all of a sudden we start to get static lines, i.e., trench warfare, and that's not going to be good for Germany. And so, if you take a look at the picture here, I think the picture on the right side of your screen here really kind of illustrates exactly what trench warfare is. What you do is you want to use first you use your air force, and so you use your air force and artillery to really kind of soften up your enemy, and then you take your tanks and you what you do is you smash through your enemies on the sides. Your enemy tends to be weaker out towards the flanks, and so the idea is to smash through them, not to stop and fight them, right? You're not trying to kill all the enemies on your initial contact. What you're doing is you're just plowing through with your tanks, and then you have your infantry follow up behind them. And now, infantry in World War II is not like infantry in World War One. It's not a bunch of people just running behind the tanks. The infantry are going to be in armored personnel carriers or APCs, and so they're in essentially lightly armored trucks. They're going to push the infantry, back behind enemy lines. And so once you get behind enemy lines, you then use a pincer movement, which is that bottom picture there on the screen, where the two sides kind of come in together to meet. And essentially, what that allows you to do is to encircle your enemy. You cut off their supply lines, you cut off their communication, and you've got them surrounded. And so you can either then at that point accept their surrender or just kill them all. And so nobody is really kind of prepared for this kind of warfare except for Germany, and it's going to be extremely successful, right? And so we've got pictures here of some of these mechanized units. You can see, tanks and armor personnel carriers, men on motorcycles, all moving into battle and moving into battle quickly. This is all going to happen. These initial battles are all going to happen so quickly that really the Allies, Great Britain, France, just aren't going to be prepared to handle it, right? All these mechanized units are supported by the Air Force, and so you've got bombers that are going to take out communications, take out enemy airfields before you attack. It's going to, kind of soften up the enemy lines where you want to plow through. Get everybody kind of take cover before your infantry, before the tanks and the men move in. Right. And so all of this just ends up really being too much for the other European powers. Now, certain countries will do better than others, obviously. Poland will be the first country to really experience Blitzkrieg tactics. The Polish people, we had talked in a previous lecture about how Hitler kind of faked this Polish attack on German soldiers, which nobody in the world really believed, and then, because he had worked out a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, he felt free to invade Poland. The non-aggression pact. Hitler couldn't just invade Poland because it neighbored the Soviet Union. And so, that would be too much of a threat to the Soviet Union. And so Hitler, came to agreement with, one of his biggest enemies, Joseph Stalin, that, hey, let's not attack each other for a while. And by the way, let's also both invade Poland. And so, Hitler invades from the West and is extremely successful, and the Soviet Union invades from the East, a little less successful, just slower. They're still going to be able to conquer that territory. And so this is the official start to World War II from the perspective of all the Western history textbooks. We've talked about this before. Really, the start is probably when Japan invaded Manchuria, but from our point of view, this is the official start of World War II. And, Hitler's going to have massive success here. Hitler invades shortly thereafter. A couple of weeks later, the Soviet Union invades, and Hitler's really going to kind of have his way with Poland. The Polish people are going to fight very, very gallantly. I mean, I think some of the most heroic stories of World War II are going to come out of Poland, whether it's the actual fighting where we're going to see cavalry, men on horses and swords, charging down tanks, which is either brave or stupid or a little bit of both. I don't know. You decide. Or if the Warsaw Uprising, and the Warsaw Ghetto after the Nazis have, taken over Poland. And so like I said, the Germans are going to essentially just walk all over Poland. The Polish people aren't going to really stand much of a chance. They just don't have the military, the technology. Remember, they're a brand new country. It's just not, they're not prepared for what's about to happen to them. And, Hitler probably could have taken all of Poland if he really wanted to, but he knew that if he took more than his half, that would upset Joseph Stalin. And although he absolutely is planning on invading the Soviet Union, and Stalin knows it. Hitler's not ready to do it yet. And, Stalin knows that Hitler plans to eventually invade him, but he thinks he's got at least 5 years. Now, the non-aggression pact is supposed to last for 10 years. Nobody believes that it will last that long, but Stalin thinks he has longer than he actually does. And so we see that the German troops are going to just completely outclass the Polish troops. You see a picture here of some Austrian troops who are obviously fighting for the Germans, coming back, just jubilant with their victory. The victory is not necessarily goes without any hitches. What Germany really learns really quickly is that Blitzkrieg is almost too successful. The soldiers actually outrun their supply lines. Now, that's not going to be a problem when you're fighting Poland, because Poland doesn't have the ability to exploit the fact that the troops outran their supplies. But when Germany starts fighting more modern countries like France and, eventually Great Britain and the Soviet Union, they're going to have to fix these problems. And so, the Germans recognize this right away, that although there's a much to be happy about with their victory over Poland, they do have some problems that they are going to have to get ironed out before they go to war with anybody else. And so what we see happen is because of that recognition, we get a time period in history referred to as the phony war. As soon as Germany invades Poland, the Western powers really start to recognize, like, oh, we have to do something about this now. The appeasement of Neville Chamberlain in Great Britain just didn't work, and so Chamberlain's out. Winston Churchill is going to be put in, and we're going to see a much more hardline approach. Both Great Britain and France are going to declare war on Germany, and then we think, oh my God, everybody has now declared war on each other, and then nothing happens. And nothing happens for a couple of reasons. One, Great Britain's just not really ready to do anything. They're not going to be prepared for a fight on the continent. There's just logistic problems there. The British Expeditionary Force is on the continent, but that's not going to be nearly enough troops to fight Germany. France really sits back and is waiting, because they're expecting to essentially fight a defensive war. They really think they're going to refight World War I, that this war is going to be all about trench warfare. And because of that, they've developed a defensive system known as the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line is like the trench to end all trenches. I mean, this thing is just stacked. It's going to have underground hospitals and barracks and mess halls, and I mean, it's just underground trains. I mean, it's absolutely legit, and it's going to have all this anti-tank defenses and concrete bunkers and artillery, and it's just out of this world. And they think that if they just sit back behind the Maginot Line, Germany will break themselves attacking the Maginot Line. That this plan is dumb. We'll explain why it's dumb here in a minute, but it is dumb, and the French should know that it's dumb, but they've essentially backed themselves into a corner. So that's why Great Britain and France aren't attacking. Germany won't be attacking because it's got to figure out all those problems that they, have realized that they have with the invasion of Poland. They recognize that, they've outrun their supply lines. They have to work on communication. They have to really digest Poland. You don't just conquer a nation. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in the battles, and we get caught up in all that kind of the victories or the losses or whatever. And what you don't tend to remember is that there's a logistic problem. Once you conquer Poland, now what are you going to do with it? You have to actually govern it. And so you have to install a sympathetic government. You've got to leave troops behind, because, the Polish people don't want to be German. And so you've got to kind of enforce your rule. You have to start to extract resources and men from that country. And it's just all of that really kind of takes time. And Germany's just kind of learning how to do this. And so the whole world is kind of waiting to see what Hitler will do next. He's trying to have his generals learn the lessons from their victory. And he's sitting back trying to think about, okay, do I deal with France next, or do I go into like the Netherlands and places like that? And so Hitler has got some logistical things that he's going to have to work out. He is going to move into some of those Northern European countries before he goes into France, primarily because he needs the oil from those areas. And so he knows that those countries are going to be relatively easy to take over. And so, but the next big target where, he knows he's going to have some resistance is going to be France. And so, the phony war is just this, like 8-month time period where people are just sitting back waiting for what's going to happen. During this time, Stalin starts taking off some of the Baltic states, kind of picking them off. And you really kind of see that, these two powers, the non-aggression powers who are not in an alliance, these guys, it is not an alliance, but they're taking advantage of the West not being in a position to really stop them, right? And so Hitler starts to think about, does he go after Norway, Denmark, or France? He will go after, Norway again, because he needs that oil. And so he'll swallow those up and then start to focus on France, right? Like I said, this time period lasts for about 8 months. And so the world declares war on each other. And then for 8 months, we really don't get much action, which is kind of, surprising to everybody. So the French and the Maginot Line. So the Maginot Line is just essentially a gigantic trench built by France. And so you can see a picture here on the right of, the Germany and France and Belgium and the border between Germany and France. That little red dotted line, that's going to be the Maginot Line. And so the Maginot Line is just this massive 87-mile long reinforced trench / bunker, that is just absolutely massive. And so, it's got, barbed wire tanks, all kinds of different, machine gun nests and, artillery. Like I said, it's got underground mess halls and hospitals and, trains for troop transportation. It's this massive thing that the French military has sunk the vast majority of their budget into, and is honestly going to eventually be useless. I mean, I think anybody looking at this map right now and sees that, that line of little red dots, you should probably see a glaring flaw in the Maginot Line. The flaw is it ends at the border with Belgium, and so you can see it begins around the Alsace-Lorraine region by the Rhine River and then ends at Belgium. Well, I mean, this is a huge flaw. The fact that it's starting in that Alsace-Lorraine region, the Ardennes forest is south of that. And so it's really believed that the Ardennes is too thick to be able to move an army through. And so, many military experts essentially say you don't have to worry about defending that section. And so I don't really blame the French for not building the line down further, except that, I mean, come on. The Germans invaded through the Ardennes during World War I, so it is possible. But the belief is modern armies have bigger mechanized things that can't be moved through the Ardennes. That's a terribly wrong assumption, by the way. And then the French actually did have plans with the people of Belgium to extend the Maginot Line all the way through to the North Sea, but at the last minute, the people of Belgium backed out because they thought that if they did that, that would be too aggressive and that it might cause Germany to invade them. So the French, after the people of Belgium back out, like honestly, at this point, it probably would have been smart to just scrap the entire Maginot Line and take all that money that you're spending and invest it in airplanes and tanks the way that Germany did. But they don't do that. They dump all their money into the Maginot Line, which even Hitler, I mean, Hitler and his generals look at the Maginot Line and they go, yep, we can't get through that. And so, it is, you're not going to be able to go over it. But clearly you can go around it, and that's exactly what Germany is going to do. And again, like the French should know that because essentially the sickle stroke plan that they come up with is the same plan from World War I, and so the Germans don't really have to do anything different. They just say, okay, we'll just go through Belgium again, right? So really, the only thing that this thing is providing is this sense of psychological security to the French, which is false security because it makes them feel safer than they actually are. They're not fake. This thing, I mean, this plan is so flawed that the guns on the Maginot Line only face to the east into Germany. And so once you get around it, you can't even really turn the guns around to fire at the enemy once they get behind those lines. So I mean, it's just it's has flaw upon flaw upon flaw. And so, even though they spend all this money for these machine gun nests and, artillery bunkers and all of this stuff all across this 87 mile long a border between France and Germany, it's really not going to mean much because essentially the Germans are just going to go around it, kind of just like they went around that exact same region during World War I. They're going to go through the Ardennes in the south, and they're going to go through Belgium in the north. And so, you can see these formidable defenses that essentially end up being just worthless. And, one of the most expensive military blunders in the history of humankind. Good job, France. So again, this is an artist's rendering of what the Maginot Line is like underneath the ground. I mean, you can see that they've built an underground city to try and defend the French border with Germany. Parts of this are still up and running today. I've never actually seen it, but I've heard that there are areas that take tourists. And so if you ever are, in the French-German region around Alsace-Lorraine, try and check it out. So again, the Maginot Line ends up being worthless. You can see here from the map on the right side of the screen that essentially the Germans are just going to sweep through Belgium. They simply go around it. Again, it's this sickle stroke that, nobody should have been surprised about. This is essentially the Schlieffen plan from World War I. And so, there's no surprise here. And again, it's going to be massively successful. We just move the troops through Belgium and through the Ardennes. He actually is able to get tanks through the Ardennes, which is, going to kind of shock the world there. Right. So Hitler is on his way to Paris. And so the target really is Paris. That's what the Germans weren't able to achieve during World War I. And so, Hitler's got Paris on the mind. And he's going to make a mistake of pride here because he's got a real opportunity as he smashes through Belgium and France. The British Expeditionary Force and the French are really going to try everything they can to stop him there. But remember what Blitzkrieg is. You don't really stop to fight your enemy until you've surrounded them. And so the Germans smash through Belgium, and they just pass up a lot of the French and British troops, and they're racing on their way to Paris because Hitler wants Paris, right? He wants to do what Germany couldn't do during World War I, and he leaves off a really great opportunity. He's got pretty much, the most trained British soldiers essentially on the ropes, and he doesn't go in for the kill shot because he's so focused on Paris. He orders his troops to essentially forget about the British and French soldiers that they had passed up and just go straight for Paris. And that's what the German soldiers do. World War II might have been a completely different story if he would have stayed and smashed those British and French soldiers, because particularly the British soldiers, leaving them alive and well and allowing them to potentially escape leaves Great Britain in the fight, right? And so, it's probably not in Germany's best interest to do that. But because of ego, Hitler kind of just leaves them, says, I'll deal with them later. We're going to go take Paris. He's going to take Paris. And when he takes Paris, he's essentially going to be able to control France. It's at this point that the leader, Charles de Gaulle, is going to have to flee. He's going to head to, go off and set up a government in exile in Great Britain. The Nazis are going to install a puppet government of sympathetic French people that are going to essentially execute the will of Adolf Hitler. This government will be known as the Vichy French. And so, boom, Hitler's take Paris, and then he's going to order his soldiers to now go and try and focus on the British soldiers that they had passed up in the invasion. And that's where we get to the miracle at Dunkirk. And so the miracle of Dunkirk, we've got 300,000 French and British troops that are all squeezed into Dunkirk, which is right on the English Channel there. And so if you take a look at the map, you can see you can see where Dunkirk is, kind of right in the. Nope. How do we want to figure out the camera? Okay, there we go. Right. So this is a mirror image, so it's really hard to point. So right there. There you go. So there's Dunkirk on the map. By the way, I felt like a total idiot doing that, but it was fun, so who cares? The British troops, along with French troops, are stuck at Dunkirk. You can see that the Nazis essentially have them surrounded, and if they want to get to safety, they're going to have to cross the English Channel and head to Dover. Which is safety. That's that's going to be England. And so, the problem is that the area in Dunkirk, it's got some shallow waters off the coast. And so the big transport ships can't just, dock in the harbor at Dunkirk. So they're kind of out in the ocean there. And we're going to have to get these troops off of the beach and onto these larger ships. And nobody's prepared for this. The British, the French aren't prepared for this. And so, these soldiers are essentially waiting there out on the beach, and you're going to see, within the next 9 days, that essentially, everybody with a rowboat in the area just comes out to try and get these soldiers off the beach into safety, because they know that once the Paris is fallen, the Nazis are going to turn back, and we got to keep these soldiers in the fight if Europe is going to have a chance. And so, if you had a fishing boat or, literally even just a rowboat, you spent the next 9 days essentially, putting soldiers on your boat and just nonstop getting them out to these larger ships, or if you had the capability, getting them all the way across to England. And so, this is because just the area just rises up to help. What we're going to see is we're going to be able to get most of these soldiers off of the beach. And now it's not just a logistical nightmare of how do we get them off of the beach and onto these boats. The Luftwaffe, the Luftwaffe, the entire time this is happening, is essentially, is attacking these soldiers on the beach. So a lot of times they're moving soldiers under fire, and it's an incredibly heroic thing that's going to happen. You can see, the pictures here of the chaos that ensues trying to get these soldiers off of the beach, and remember, right? The British are not prepared for the large scale war that's about to happen. These troops are trained professional soldiers, and if Great Britain wants to be able to stay in the fight, they're going to need these soldiers. And plus, they don't know what's going to be happening next with Denmark, Denmark. They don't know what's going to be happening next with Germany. Is Germany going to be invading Great Britain next? And if that's what it is, we're going to need these. We're going to need these soldiers. So, most of the soldiers will make it out. Not all of them. About 34,000 will end up being taken prisoner. But the majority of the soldiers are going to be out, which is going to keep Great Britain in the fight, which is going to be super important, because remember, America hasn't gotten involved yet. And so, essentially by this point, with the exception of, the neutral nations, what we're going to see is that, Hitler's got Europe. He's done what Germany attempted to do during World War I. So the next big target is going to be Great Britain. And so Hitler comes up with the plan to invade Great Britain. This plan is called Operation Sea Lion. And so Hitler is going to attempt to use the Luftwaffe to take out the British Air Force, the RAF, the Royal Air Force. And, the belief is that the German Luftwaffe is the most superior air force in the world. And so Hitler believes that what he can do is use the Luftwaffe essentially to destroy the British Air Force, and then soften up an area for a landing, and then do a cross-channel invasion and take out Great Britain. He needs to take out Great Britain because what he really wants to do is to invade the Soviet Union. But as long as Great Britain's in the fight, if he turns and attacks the Soviet Union, he's got a war on two fronts. And so, Operation Sea Lion is super important. But what he doesn't understand is that the British have actually, modernized their Air Force. The British are going to have, a relatively modern Air Force. But what the British Air Force, the Luftwaffe is a superior air force. I think there's really no doubt about that in the beginning of the war. But the British have something that the Luftwaffe doesn't, and that's radar. And so as the Luftwaffe or the German Air Force is attacking the British can see it coming. And so they've set up a system where they're able to rally anytime it looks like the Luftwaffe is coming to attack a place in England. The British Air Force is able to get pilots in the air and to counter it, and they're going to be able to do that very successfully. I think even to this day, the British are incredibly proud of the pilots of the RAF during World War II, and they essentially are going to save Great Britain. The Luftwaffe is never able to, take out the British Air Force. They're never able to soften up an area area of Great Britain to where they, feel safe to try a cross-channel invasion, and eventually Hitler's going to have to give up. And so he only gives up when he believes that the British have been fighting long enough, and he's taken a toll on their air force enough that they're not a real threat to him. He's wrong. Just the existence of Great Britain as a power, as a rival power, is a threat to Hitler. And so Hitler's about to make his second big mistake. If his first big mistake was not taking out the British Expeditionary Force before Dunkirk, his second big mistake is that he is going to essentially turn his back on Great Britain, thinking that they're, if not defeated enough that they're not a threat, and then turn and attack the Soviet Union. The reason why that's a huge mistake is because when America does get involved in this war, it would have been incredibly difficult for America to really have any impact unless they had a staging point to attack mainland Europe. And that staging point is going to be Great Britain. And so just allowing Great Britain to survive is essentially going to put Hitler in a situation that's untenable situation. He's just not going to be able to deal with fighting both the Soviet Union in the East and America in the West. And so the Battle of Great Britain and the Battle of Britain ends up being extremely significant. And the British have radar and just the extreme bravery of their pilots. So Hitler, like I said, decides to storm Britain with Operation Sea Lion, right? So to do that, he's going to try and bomb Great Britain into submission. He's going to find out what we've really kind of have learned in modern times is that if you're trying to bomb a civilian population into submission, the opposite thing ends up happening is the civilians actually get more resolute in their defense of their country. It's, well, you're going to attack me at my home. Okay, then I'm going to make whatever sacrifices I need to do to defend my country and my family. And so this kind of backfires for Germany. Right, this ends up being a complete air war. You just see, the fight for dominance of airspace over Great Britain becomes of the utmost importance, and it's going to be radar that is going to keep Great Britain really in this fight. When it becomes clear that the Luftwaffe isn't going to be able to get this done, he starts using V1 and V2 rockets in an attempt to, scare the British and to get the British to capitulate. But V1 and V2 rockets they really have more of a psychological effect than a strategic effect. What happens is, these rockets, and these are some of the first rockets ever to be used, right? They're being shot from mainland Europe into, London and other places around England, and they're not very accurate. They're, they can do some destruction, right? They hit a building and that building's in some real serious trouble. But if you want to, you're just not going to be able to, use these V1 and V2 rockets to get a country to surrender, just because you would, even just to have the potential to do that, you would essentially have to carpet bomb the entire city of London. And that just, Germany just doesn't have the capability to do that. And even if they did, what we learned really quickly with these bombing campaigns is, London just starts to move everything underground. Parliament is still today. You can go visit the where British Parliament met during World War II in an underground bunker in London. I mean, the factories get moved underground, and it just kind of takes these bombs out of the equation. And so, Hitler is not going to be able to win this battle in the air, and it's going to keep Great Britain in the fight. And so here's a picture of a V2 rocket. right? And some of the devastation left behind from a V2 rocket. So, this is going to be psychologically scary. It's a new kind of warfare where civilians are much more at risk. We're going to see an escalation of these bombings. The what's going to end up happening is neither side, and I think that sometimes we forget this. Neither side really wanted in the beginning to bomb civilian populations, not out of some sort sense of empathy for your enemy, but because if I bomb your civilians, you'll bomb my civilians, and so Hitler really doesn't want to start bombing civilians because he knows that if the British and French start bombing his civilians, he'll lose support within Germany. And so that's the only thing that's really threatening his government. And so he doesn't want to do that. Once he's got control of essentially of mainland Europe, it becomes much more difficult for the Allies to bomb Berlin, say. And because of that, we're going to start to see a move to like nighttime raids over London. Those raids aren't going to be able to be as targeted because it's dark outside. We're going to see civilian centers getting hit. Once a couple of London civilian centers get hit, then all of a sudden you're going to start to see retaliation on, Axis powers civilian population, and then it starts to escalate, and then it becomes essentially a free for all. Both sides have some guilt here. I mean, clearly, the Germans are going to be more at fault, but it's not as open and shut of a case as many people would like to believe. I mean, I think it's really easy to say that Hitler is just this heartless thug and never cared about civilian populations. I would agree. He is a heartless thug and he does not care about civilian populations. But he was also a pragmatist and didn't want his civilians being killed because of how that might affect his power. And so there's this slow build to the targeting of civilian populations. That's really going to become evident with the Allied bombing of Dresden, which we'll talk about later. So this leads us through the Battle of Britain. This is where we are going to leave off for today. The next lecture will be on American isolationism and what is the United States doing as Europe is at war. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.